Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, The State of Incident Management. Lack of automation hinders speed of response to IT outages and incidents. Today's webinar is brought to you by Everbridge. I'm Roy Atkinson, and I'll be your moderator today. We just have a few announcements before we begin. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webcast. They'll be answered during the Q&A session toward the end of the webcast. And you'll be able to download slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. And remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email reminder to let you know that it's available. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and at our member community at HDI Connect. Joining me today for the webinar will be Vincent Jeffrey from Everbridge. He's a Senior Director of Product Marketing, focusing on IT service alerting and notification automation. He has more than 15 years of experience in the IT operations and service management space with expertise in critical communications, IT service alerting, application performance management, IT process runbook, and workload automation. And today we're going to start off with a little story from my background in IT, which has to do with major incidents. We're going to talk a lot today about major incidents, how often they happen, how they affect your organization, and what you might be able to do to get some better processes wrapped around those major incidents. I will tell you that some years ago, not that far distant in the past, I showed up for work one morning, and it happened to be January, same month we're in now, and discovered that one of the major systems at our organization was completely down. It was email. There was no email to be had in the organization. And that meant a whole bunch of things, including that people couldn't communicate. It was very difficult for us to communicate out from IT, obviously, to let people know what was going on. It also meant that one of the major ordering systems for a product from the organization was completely down because it was powered by email. Customers would send in an email that would launch the application that they needed to connect with, would create the sales order from the email, and that sales order would be forwarded to the appropriate department. None of that worked. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were going up in smoke. And the second part of that story is that the people who needed to get their attention on in the middle of the night, when IT was not staffed at all, we had nobody and no on-call process at that time. Nobody knew that this was going on until the following morning. That was day one. Day two, our network decided it wasn't going to cooperate with us, and our network was down. Day three, a major storage system decided to go belly up, and it turns out that it hadn't been backed up the way we expected it to be. And so on, day after day, and this continued for 21 straight days of major outages. Let me tell you that it caused a great deal of pain throughout the organization, certainly in IT, where we felt incredibly responsible for all this and had to rely on our processes such as they were at the time to help us ameliorate this issue. But Vincent, I'm sure you've seen things like this happen to organizations. And we're going to talk about some of the results that you have about major incidents, major incident response, and how major incidents affect organizations. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Roy. And I want to start by thanking you for having me here. Really good story. I guess that's the time where no one is thinking about taking vacation, right? When this is happening. So
that is absolutely true.
So and great example that you take, because I think everybody on the phone today can relate to emails are down for a business, for a company, and the potential impact it can have on the business and operations of the company. So, Roy, you just said that we're going to be talking about major incident management today, and we will. And I'll be sharing with you some of the findings of our survey. But just before I get into the details of those results, just want to mention that this survey was conducted by Everbridge a few months ago. And it is based on the responses we got from 152 IT professionals across multiple industries, actually across 22 industries. So this is really going into all type of businesses, looking at the impact of IT issues on their business. I should add that 80% of the respondents were from companies with more than 1,000 employees, and 52% of those respondents were from companies which have more than 10,000 employees. Okay, so having said that, I see that you've put up the first slide, and the first slide is about how often do companies see major incidents just like the ones you talked about, Roy. So the reason why we conducted this survey was to really get a better understanding on how IT organizations dealt with major incidents and IT outages today. So, for example, how often they experience major incidents, how easy it is for them to detect those incidents and to triage those incidents, and more importantly, what was the process and how efficient was this process of dealing with those major incidents. And when I say dealing, this is really the entire resolution process. So the first finding, as you can see here, is that 9 in 10 companies said that they have had experienced at least one major incident in the past 12 months. So, which means they've been dealing with an IT issue important enough that it had a negative impact on their business operations. What's also interesting is that if you do the math, you'll see that 26%, 36% of the companies have dealt with major IT outages more than 10 times in the past 12 months, which means it's almost one major issue every month. And the survey also told us that there are companies who are, you feel bad for them, they are just dealing with major incidents one after the other. So bottom line here, or the key takeaway here is this is happening almost for every company, regardless of the business you're in.
And can you talk a little bit, Vincent, about the types of major incidents that we're talking about here?
Yeah, so that was our next question in this survey. We wanted to understand, okay, so you're facing and experiencing major IT issues. What are the top causes for those issues? And okay, here's the slide. And very interesting. What you see here is that so we had this question, and we did the math. And top 2 reasons for IT outages are network issues, just like the example you shared with us, Roy, and IT component failure are responsible for 61% and 58% of the major incidents. Third comes internal business application issues. So I would qualify or consider the email outage that you talked about, Roy, to be in this bucket, internal business application issues. But what's interesting to see here is that those issues will happen regardless. So with those issues, really, it's not about if it's going to happen, but really when. A network outage will happen. IT component failure will happen. It's just like, I guess, Roy, and everybody on the phone today, you all have a laptop from where you're doing your job, right? And you know it's going to die. You know your laptop's going to die. So you need to be prepared for that. So that's why you do backups and so on and so forth. So IT components fail. And this was reported as the major causes for those IT outages. We were a little surprised about the results around cyber attack and DDoS attack, because when talking with IT organizations, we feel like this is coming more and more often in the discussions that we are having, but it was only reported in 14% of the cases to be the cause for the outage.
And I can embellish on your analysis there a little bit and tell you that of those major outages that I was talking about at the beginning, these are exactly the categories into which they fell, with the exception of the cyber attack. As far as I know, at that point we were not the victim of a cyber attack or DDoS. But network outages, hardware failure, remember I talked about the storage where we lost a lot of information, the internal business application issues, unplanned maintenance. We had a UPS failure in our data center, which took the entire data center down, and we had to get a new UPS in there, and during the course of that, it took the data center down again. It was just absolutely amazing. And of course, releases that do not go well are certainly a major cause of incidents of all types across the organization. So there's all kinds of fun going on here, and these buckets are absolutely the ones with which I am the most familiar.
So to your point, Roy, let me add something here to just because of what you just said. You talked about release, deployment, and cyber attack. So I think we're going to see more and more cyber attacks and DDoS attacks having an impact on businesses for companies who are actually doing business over the internet. Think about e-commerce platforms, companies which are selling products and services over the internet. Think about companies which provide SaaS platform. So that means their platform needs to be available all the time, right? Think about mobile banking. So all those companies that have customer-facing application on the web would be, I guess, more subject to cyber attacks and DDoS attacks as opposed to manufacturing and the companies who have only internal applications. Which makes sense, and those same companies, and I'm thinking all the born on the web companies like Uber, Netflix, Airbnb, Amazon, all those companies have to deploy and bring to market features all the time and very often, right? So release deployment will have an impact on their business operation if something goes wrong during the deployment into production. So I would expect that next year we see those numbers even go higher.
I would expect that as well. Hopefully, some disciplines around things like DevOps and improved change management within organizations will try to keep that release deployment number down a little bit. Just to talk a little bit more about cyber attacks. Of course, anybody that's doing e-commerce or any type of online business, which is pretty much everybody now when you think about it, is subject to these, especially the higher profile organizations. But at the same time, organizations like universities and research institutions are also subject to this, and the consequences can be catastrophic. And it's not necessarily that you get shut down or that you get things stolen, identity breaches, that type of thing. But also, as I used to say to the scientists that I worked with, they weren't too concerned about cyber attacks at first because they said, well, their information is going to become public anyway. Their results are published. And I said, okay, well, that's great, but what if somebody comes in and changes your data? That will change the results of years' worth of experiments for you. So we have to be, on the lookout for any kind of network penetrations and so forth. So if you're connected, you're at risk, basically. And like you said, it's not if, but when.
Exactly. And just to add one more comment to that, what we see a lot those days, I mean, I'm going to say for the past 2 years, is the increase of ransomware attacks. So usually targeting hospitals and healthcare facilities, because they know that in a hospital, everything is driven by the EMR, the electronic medical record system, or the electronic health system that has to be up and running for all the different departments. If not, patient safety can be at risk, right? So that's also I would classify the ransomware attack under cyber attack, and in some industries like healthcare, it's almost like the same consequences as a cyber attack for online retailers, or the example you just took.
Yeah, for sure. And the vulnerability is very, very important, and that's why security appears so often at the top of the list when senior executives are looking at what they care about most in IT, what keeps them up at night, all those types of questions that a lot of organizations ask about. Which brings us to cost of downtime, all right? Supposing your services are interrupted and you do have a DDoS attack and your services are offline, that impact can absolutely be enormous. And how do we get at the cost of downtime, and how is it determined? And can we look at that a little bit? And you have some great numbers here around those.
Yeah, so that's the next question we wanted to, or the next information we wanted to look at is, okay, the company is having a major incident, a major outage. What really is the impact on the business operations of that very company, right? And interestingly enough, the top two impact on the business are, the first one is for 60% for 63%, the impact is on employee productivity. So you can tell that the respondents here are working in companies where the most important computer applications serve their internal employees, workers. So that would be, I'm going to give you a few examples here of applications we're talking about. That could be the supply chain management application for manufacturing company, the invoicing, shipping, payroll. You mentioned email. Email would be considered an internal application that has an impact on employee productivity. And the second impact on the business is really an impact for us in IT. It's the disruption and the distraction that those major IT issues are generating within the IT department. So, think about alert fatigue, receiving emails or alerts for each of those IT outages. So you're just, giving up what you're doing right now and looking at those alerts to see if you are required to work on those issues. But that can be also, if we go back to the example you took with the business being impacted for days, that means people in the IT department are just spending their whole time trying to resolve those incidents while they're not working on their assigned project. So that this is unplanned IT work and disruption and distraction. So that was the first finding here. Now, if you look at all the answers that we got from the respondents, you'll see that one of the big business impact, or the impact in the business, was, of course, decreased customer satisfaction. If I go back to online retailers, e-commerce companies, if I need to book a flight today, because I have to visit a customer tomorrow, I need to book this flight now, right? So I'm gonna check my favorite website, and if for some reason it's too slow, or if it doesn't work, or if there's any glitch with this website, I am going to to use another one, right? I am not loyal to the website from where I can book my flight. So customer satisfaction, and we know from other studies and researches that have been done that a website which is too slow is going to see is the revenue that it generates go down, and it's going to see the conversion rate go down as well, and customer satisfaction also be impacted. The second item here is revenue loss. So again, it really applies to companies who are doing business online. If your application is not available, then there's going to be an impact on revenue generation, right? That this is almost a no-brainer here. So these are the tangible impacts on the business, but you also have intangible impact like bad publicity, brand damage. Roy, you talked about cyber attacks. You know what happens as soon as a publicly traded company is being attacked and there's a data leak and customer either social security numbers or banking account numbers or credit card numbers are exposed. This is going to make the headlines on every website, reporting on IT issues, and this can be very bad for the company. We all remember what happened at Sony Pictures, right? And so on and so forth. So and then we also have people reporting that IT issues had a direct impact on the value of the company's stock. So again, a combination of tangible and intangible costs, but really showing that a major IT issue today is really a business issue.
There's also an intangible, I think, that bears at least thinking about, which is the effect on overall employee morale. Obviously, the IT people who are directly affected by these, are working extended hours and overnight and weekends and all of that to remedy the situation are affected adversely. But also the employees who depend on these business services, as a rule, that what happens is that their morale is affected too, and partly because they've lost trust in the system. For example, now they send an email and they're wondering if it's going to get there, or if the email system is going to fail somehow, or we're going to be disconnected from the internet, or whatever it happens to be. And that can have an effect too. That can bring productivity down. Aside from the immediate effects of not being able to do their work, there's also an effect on wondering what's going to happen next, especially in a case where, as I was involved with repeated major incidents, that's a really tough scenario for employees to get through.
I totally agree with you, Roy, and that makes me remember in the previous company that I worked for, and I'm not going to tell the name, but I know two people over there who resigned because of alert fatigue. So, I mean, it's almost the same theme that you were talking about. They were just tired of being waken up at night for issues that they had nothing to do with.
And now we come to the thing that really gets business's attention, which is the actual dollar cost of downtime. And one of the questions that I had on the slide earlier is, how do you determine this? And one of the ways that I usually advise people to try to determine it is to at least get, and some of this information is very difficult to get because it requires divulging at least partially employee salaries or employee earnings, whatever happens to be in your organization. But one of the ways to get at it is to calculate what's called the interrupted user minutes. How long did the incident take? How many people were affected? So you count the minutes times the number of users, and you get the interrupted user minutes, or IUM is the metric. You can look it up online. It's a very, very interesting metric. And then what you do is you take an average value. Let's say that your sales team produces $20 worth of sales per minute on average, and then you deprive them of their ability to earn that $20 per minute for 200 minutes. Well, then you've got a cost associated with that. So it's not only organizations that have a direct cost, such as lost sales through retail website, but every organization has a cost of downtime depending on what they do and what that per minute value is and how many users have been deprived of it. So, but this is a terrific number. I mean, it's huge when you extrapolate to what an hour is.
Yeah, and to your point, so here this is really the number that we get from the survey. So we didn't explain in the survey how people would get to this number. We didn't explain how to calculate the downtime, just like the cost of downtime, just like you just did. So that's very interesting to see that this is the average cost per minute of unplanned downtime that we got. And it's very interesting if you follow a company. It's called the Ponemon Institute. What they do is they publish a research every 3 years on this very topic, and it's amazing to see how close we are to their estimated cost of downtime by a few dollars. So this, which is telling me that the group of people who responded to our survey is pretty relevant, and we really get a pretty good sample here. Just to add to what you said about how to calculate the cost of downtime for your industry, what we usually do with IT organizations who are interested in trying to find out what is their number, their magic number, right? I usually advise them to consider their critical applications. So critical application per critical application, they can be looking at two things. If it's a customer-facing application, like an e-commerce platform, a SaaS platform, e-commerce, mobile banking, and so on and so forth, they can look at the revenue that is actually generated by the application. Let's take as an example a hotel reservation platform where people would book hotel rooms, right, from a website. It's pretty easy to get to an average number of nights that are being booked every day on a daily basis on the platform, multiplied by the average cost of a hotel night, and that can easily give them a sense of how much is generated by the application per hour. And to that, you want to add the additional inbound call volumes that you're getting anytime there's a major issue. And think about financial penalties that you may have. Some companies have SLAs and they need to restore services within a predefined time frame. If they don't, they may be subject to additional costs and penalties. So that's how you can calculate the cost for a customer-facing application. For an internal computer application that is provided to your workers, your employees, think about emails, think about, let's say you have a SAP system in place, you have an electronic health record system in the hospital. Just think about the number of people, of workers that are impacted, and then multiply these by the percent of impact. What I call the percentage of impact is if the application is not available to your workers, can they still do their job? Yes or no? How much of their job can they do without the application? And multiply this by the average, just take an average salary for those workers, and that's going to give you a pretty good estimate of the number. And again, you can also add paid overtime that you may have the business may have to pay for the goods that were not produced on time, and so on and so forth. And again, financial penalties and additional inbound call volumes into the service desk. So like you can see on this slide, this number is pretty amazing, 8,662 per minute. That's more than $500,000 per hour. So when you think about it, you understand that major IT issues are going to strike. Now, from an IT perspective, what we need to do is first to be prepared so that we can reduce the time it takes to repair, to restore the service. And I guess, Roy, that's what we want to talk about next, right?
Sure. And I actually peeked ahead at the questions, and there's one question about. Normally, I say these till the question period, but of these incidents, let's see. How does your company handle the plan to resolve the issue when there's a major incident? So, I think that's part of what we're going to talk about next. So that's why I introduced that question here. And you better have a plan. That's number one. You should really think about having a plan. And we'll talk about how these things are identified and who responds and what happens. But the key thing to start with is make sure that your organization has a plan to deal with a major incident, whatever it is. And then we'll walk through this a little bit. Do you want to go ahead and step through this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Of course, we may find different processes for different companies. You may have your own process, other companies may have different processes, but in the end of the day, I like to summarize the major incident process and break it down into 5 phases. The first one is when we have an issue, first we need to be made aware of that issue, right? So we're going to detect the issue, categorize the issue, turn it into an incident if we have a ticketing system, and at one point this incident is going to become a P1, or a SEV 1, severity 1, priority 1, or major incident, right? Now, what comes next is, okay, someone's going to have some team, some people are going to have to start addressing this issue, right? So there's the response team phase where we are going to contact those people who have to get on deck and start working on this issue. The third phase is going to be the investigation, getting to the root cause. What is the root cause of this major issue that we are having right now? Once we found the root cause, then this team is going to put together a remediation plan, and then we'll execute the plan, provided that it's going to be approved by the emergency cab, and we're going to validate that whatever modification we've made in production has fixed the issue or resolved the incident through the validation phase. And what we see and what we've seen is that many companies, a lot of companies have heavily invested in phase 1, detecting the issues ASAP. I want to know about a potential issue even before my customers feel the problem, right? And remediation, usually it's pretty straightforward. Once you know what's going wrong, usually we can fix it in a timely manner. Validation can also be automated. Now, the phase number 2, that's where we see very little automation, and that's where we see companies with so many different ways to address this phase here. So that's what we want to talk about now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I said that you should have a plan in place, these are elements of a plan. And these are the things that you should think about. And if you have access to thinkhdi.com, if you look in the white paper section, there's a paper that I wrote several years ago called Communicating and Staffing for Unplanned Outages, and it's all about who needs to be involved and how they get involved and all kinds of things. The first thing that has to happen, I think, Vincent, is that you identify the issue as a major incident, and somebody's got to make that call, and that person should be identified ahead of time. None of this should be happening on the fly except where it needs to be specific actions. Sometimes you have to make decisions, but somebody's got to say, yeah, this is a P1, the response team gets assembled, and then the steps fall into place after that. But this is the outline of the plan that you need to have in place. So in the survey, you learned, I think, that there are phases of the plan that can be improved, and one of them is that we find out about things a little quicker. And as you can see here, now this is HDI data. This is from our annual survey and report, which is called the Technical Support Practices and Salary Report. You can get that if you're a member. Get it at thinkhdi.com. 72% of support centers are not staffed 24/7, which is, at least in this day and age, a little bit surprising, don't you think? And then it shows some of the ways in which after-hours ticket handling, because in my experience, I think in probably everybody's experience, these bad things tend to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's when they tend to go south. And so you have to depend on whatever system it is to be alerted. And the last thing you want is to find out that you've got one of these major incidents underway by having customers tell you. That's not a good way to find out that an incident is underway, is to have people telling you. You should know about it ahead of time through your systems. But you know, another department might handle your incidents, but they might not understand the priorities and so forth. So you really need to have a good plan in place and figure out what your staffing needs to look like. Maybe you can't afford to have 24/7 staff, and that's fine, but you need to have a plan in place to be able to handle bad things when they happen, because as you said, Vincent, they will happen. They're going to happen. So let's take a look at some more data here. And
yeah, I just wanted to add quickly, Roy, that yes, exactly what you said. It's when your customer tell you that you have an issue, it's too late. You're right.
Yes.
And it's not going to be the topic of this webinar, but we could, in an upcoming webinar, we could talk about what companies can do to be proactive in terms of detection of those issues, so that you know before your customers even feel it.
And just to continue with HDI data, we know that alerts and monitoring are increasingly important today, as over where they were a few years ago. Alerts and monitoring are, because everything is moving so fast, for one thing, and because companies are increasingly dependent upon IT systems. So here's another complication to the matter here, and that's where's the team location. So in this data, which is also HDI data, you can see that a lot of organizations have staff in several countries and multiple sites, maybe multiple sites. 27% have multiple sites in a single country, but many have multiple countries, 19%. So almost about a fifth of support centers are scattered across multiple countries. And so the communication systems between those support centers needs to be rapid, and it needs to get people on the issue as fast as possible. So that's just to point out the importance of the communication systems involved here. Also, look at where the customers are. This is also HDI data. Companies have high percentages of customers that are scattered all over the world. Now, our data comes primarily from North America, but North American companies have customers in Asia Pacific. They have customers in Africa. They have customers in Europe. They have customers in Latin America. And so communication, again, if you've got a communications outage of some kind, which can be a SEB1 for sure, those customers that you have may not be able to communicate with you that they're having difficulty over there in Asia Pacific. So you might want to think about having a system in place that will let you know ahead of time. So the worldwide nature of what we do is increasingly important now.
Yes, and this is great data because, like you said, when we're facing a major incident, every minute's going to count, right? Because of this significant impact on the business. So there's no time for guesswork. There's no time to figure out what we're going to do. Everything should be planned, right? And very interesting data about distributed teams. How do you know who's going to be responsible for responding to a specific incident if you don't know how to contact people, right? So part of our survey was, okay, so how do you know who to contact? Because the first thing to do when you're going to assemble this team of experts is, okay, who should be on that team? Again, we don't want to send blast email to entire teams, right? Because we know what's going to happen. People in IT, people receive a few hundreds, if not thousands, of emails every day, right? So how do you make sure that it goes to the right people, right? So the question was, how do you know who to contact when facing a major incident? As you can see, only 11% of the respondents have a centralized on-call schedule management system in place. But 30%, almost 30% said they don't even have a formal process in place to manage on-call personnel, on-call staff, right? So that means at any given time, they don't know who's on call to respond to an incident, right? And 24% still use spreadsheets, notebooks, and phone books, which, as you can tell, you already know that it's going to take some time for whoever has to contact this IT staff to assemble this team. So that was the first finding here. A lot of companies are not there yet in terms of knowing automatically who should be responding to a specific IT incident. And if we go to the next slide, then we ask the question about, okay, let's say whatever you're using, whether it is automated, whether you have a solution or not, you may be doing this manually. At one point, you're going to identify who should be responding. Now, how do you contact those people, right? And so the finding here is that 83% of the respondents said that they use email to communicate with their IT teams when facing a major incident, which raises a big concern. And I have to, I'm going back to your first story, the story you shared with us, Roy, where when emails were down. So how do you deal with reaching out to people via emails if the very reason for having a major IT incident is because email is down? So another reason for maybe not using email to reach out to people is, like you said, we have distributed teams now, and if it's the middle of the night for me, if you're going to send me an email because you need me on this restoration call, it's most likely that your email is not going to wake me up, right? So using emails, with using email, I don't know if you've received an email, if you've taken any actions to work on a specific incident. You may be away from your desk, you may be on vacation, you may be in a meeting, and so on and so forth. So I have no control over the fact whether or not you've received this email. We can see that companies are also using phone calls, SMS, conference line. So conference line is used for once you've assembled the team, you have to give them some communication, some collaboration tools, and a conference call is the preferred way. As a reminder, best practices would say that for every IT issue, major IT issue, you want to open at least 2 conference calls, one for your IT resolvers, the IT staff that is actively going to address the issue, and one for the management. Best practices, don't mix the two together. You don't want your business guys to ask questions to your IT guys. This is just going to be distraction, disruption. Let them work on resolving the incident and have a second conference bridge to share updates with management.
And it is interesting to me that a lot of people haven't thought through the alternate means of communication that they might be able to use if some of their major systems are down. And it's part of it is maybe not being exposed to the kind of technologies that you're talking about. And another thing is that they just have not sat down and worked on that plan, how they're going to deal with a major incident when it happens, and especially affecting communications. It's actually a pretty common type. And I keep thinking about when we were back talking about the cost of downtime and things like that, and here as well, talking about the communication tools involved. I remember that there was an outage of the NASDAQ stock exchange that was caused by squirrels that ate through a major bundle of telephone wires that connected NASDAQ to the outside world and took NASDAQ off the air, essentially. So you never quite know what's going to happen, and you have to figure out how you're going to work around some of these situations before they ever happen. How are you going to respond to these things? And it's basically the same type of incident response that you see in emergency services. And there are a lot of commonalities between how major incident response works and how emergency response works. And sometimes they blend, as you were talking about hospitals before, Vincent. Sometimes it becomes an emergency when the electronic equipment is not available to the healthcare providers. So this is fascinating stuff. And this here again, this is HDI data. And does the channel impact the speed of action? This is on a day-to-day basis. So this is not for P1 incidents, but you can see here what the differences are between the speeds of response on phone versus email, et cetera. So email is, could be 1 to 4 hours. That's the predominant response here at 39%. 1 to 4 hours is not good enough in terms of a major incident at that $8,600+ a minute. So that's not going to cut it. And if we look at voicemail, voicemail is the channel that gets forgotten, I think. And again, a high percentage, 1 to 4 hours, even just short of 10% at 4 to 8 hours to get to an email, a voicemail rather, excuse me. And this, I think, is a little bit more representative across the board for high priority incidents. So why don't you talk about this one a little bit, Vincent?
Yeah, so that was, by the way, that's great data, and it totally aligns with our findings. I'm still shocked to see how much time it takes people to answer emails. So showing that it is really not what you want to do. You do not want to contact people via email when under a major incident. And by the way, we haven't talked about it, but you raised the point of distributed teams, and if I need, let's say we have a major issue right now, and I need to reach out to a few people in the network team, a few DBAs, but I also need to get a 1 or 2 Java developers, and guess what? My development center is in Beijing, China, and my DBA is in Europe, and only my network guys are in the US, which means when I'm going to send out SMS or try to call them, we need to make sure that whatever communication system we have or we use, it is going to be seen as a local call when it comes to the recipient in its own time zone and own country. Most likely, people are not going to respond to a phone call coming from the US if they are in Beijing, right? So think about this. Have local caller IDs for your communications. So, enough of that.
If I can just follow on to that thought, it's also important to realize that obviously Beijing is in a completely different time zone from the U.S., and so therefore a thing that happens during the daytime here might be in the middle of the night over there and is going to require a different kind of response.
Exactly. So the question we asked was, okay, whatever you use, like I said, whatever you use to know who you need to contact, and then you're going to contact those people via different means, right? We said emails and everything else. We asked the question, so on average, how much time does it take you to get the team assembled so they can start addressing the issue? And this is the finding. This is the result. 27 minutes is the time it takes for phase number 2, response team assembled. So again, between the time that we've declared we have a P1 and the time the team is going to actually start investigating the issue, I'm going to say we've spent 27 minutes for almost nothing when it comes to working on this incident. So then with this data, we decided to do the math. And that's going to be the next slide. So we said we wanted to understand how much this phase in the major incident response process would cost an organization on average. So we just, took those 27 minutes, which is the average time to get everybody assembled and start addressing the issue, by the average cost per minute And significant finding here. We came up with this number. I mean, the respondents came up with this number. That's more than $230,000 per major incident, which is just, let's call it, spent to assemble the team.
It's a huge cost just to get that far. And just to make sure that we're not making people cry here, I will tell a couple of amusing metrics that I've heard over the years. One of them is, and is very relevant here when we're trying to get that team together, is something I heard from my friend Carlos Casanova, and he referred to it as mean time to find someone, MTTFS, mean time to find someone. And a lot of times that's relevant. Where are they? Are they in a meeting? Nobody knows where they are. They can't be located. They're not answering their phone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's kind of a tongue-in-cheek measurement there, MTTFS. And the other one is maybe more relevant to the data breach question, and that's MTTCA, and that's mean time till the CEO apologizes. A little bit of levity introduced to the conversation so that we're not completely doom and gloom. So I especially like that, and that comes from, I believe that's a Forrester tongue-in-cheek metric, mean time till the CEO apologizes.
That's a good one. I didn't know this one. That's a good one.
It is a good one.
But what's very interesting here, we know that the investigation of the issue will require some time. You know, people are going to work on trying to identify the root cause, and they may be using tools such as a UEM product or APM products and so on and so forth. And that's fine. I mean, they're going to spend the time it takes to isolate the issue and then put in place a remediation plan. But for this particular phase, the time to assemble the team, or the meantime to find someone, like you said, this is really not helping in any way the incident resolution. This is just time that is unnecessarily wasted. Yeah. So if you are an adept of Lean IT, trying to find, inefficiencies in your process, that would be a really good low-hanging fruit here, because there are solutions out there that can help you reduce this time and make it, like we said from the beginning, have a plan and automate this phase so that anytime you have a major incident, you know exactly who to reach out, and you have a system in place that's going to help you reach out to those people in a timely manner, but always the same way, so that your process will become predictable and repeatable. And just to give you data, this is not what we ask in our survey, but from our experience working with IT organizations, and most of the organizations should be looking at reducing these 27 minutes to an average of 5 minutes.
Right. That's tremendous. Thank you. And I think we need to move on to some questions now. And one question I will answer, and I knew we were going to get this one, and it has to do, I think, with some of the HDI data. And they say that the numbers aren't making a lot of sense. It's much more than 100%. Can you explain that? And the answer to that is very simple. In any survey, when you ask a question and you say select all that apply, they may have multiple answers, and that indicates that perhaps multiple percentages live in Latin America. You may have customers in Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And so those numbers appear not to add up to 100% because essentially they don't add up to 100%. It's not where is a certain percentage of one organization's customers located, whereas an aggregate of customers located, and therefore those numbers don't add up to 100%. When you ask a select all that apply, you never get 100%. So I think I answered that one. Can you repeat the name of the document you wrote? I have that on the bottom of the screen. I put that up in a message for you, communicating and staffing for unplanned outages. What are you seeing as the low-hanging fruit for teams trying to reduce MTTR for P1 outages? Alternatively, what parts of the resolution process tend to have the most time wasted? Vincent, you want to talk about that a little bit? Where do you see people being able to gain time in responding?
Yeah. So if we go back to the overall process, if we break it down in 5 phases, the first one being the identification of a major incident. The second one being the response team assembly. Third one to be the investigation, then remediation and validation. What we've seen is a lot of companies, most of the companies have invested in early detection of IT incidents. And I'm thinking here of all the network performance management solution that we have out there, application performance management. I'm going to give you names here. That doesn't mean that I recommend those tools, but they're just tools that are around. I'm thinking New Relic, AppDynamics, SOSTA, Dynatrace. These kind of companies help identify issues even before the customers find out. And then you have tools like event correlation tools like Evaneos, Mooksoft, Microsoft SCOM, Splunk can also help in those. And we've seen companies invest a lot in these solutions over the past, I'm going to say over the past 7 to 8 years. At the end of the process, we have a remediation and validation. Remediation, that's when you execute your remediation process, right? So what we've seen is investment in solutions like runbook automation tools, but also release automation tools so that you can apply a fix into production or change into your production environment much faster. And validation, we've seen a lot of automation here to reduce the time it takes to validate that whatever you've done in your production environment has actually repaired the service. Now, to answer the question, where do we see the most time wasted? And again, this is what you see on the slide here. It's in the phase number 2, response team assembly, or like Roy said, the mean time to find someone. That's where we see a lot of manual processes. People are still dealing with spreadsheets, with phone books, trying to actually manually call people in different countries when it's the middle of the night for them. So we see a lot of improvement that can be done easily in this phase here by using on-call schedule management so that you know exactly who should respond to what incident, and then IT alerting solutions to reach out to the right people through different communication channels. So that it's not just going to be an email or just a phone call. It's going to be a phone call. If people don't respond, they're going to receive an SMS. If they still don't respond, they may receive another phone call, and so on and so forth, up until they respond. And if they don't respond after a few cycles, it's gonna contact the next person in line automatically and automatically escalate to the management if need be.
Thank you. And we just have time for a couple more questions here. I'll try to get to them quickly. And I think you did mention this at the beginning. What's the average size of number of employees of the surveyed companies from your survey, Vincent?
So in our survey, we had, responding to this survey, 86% of the respondents were from companies with more than 1,000 employees and 52% in companies even bigger than or larger than 10,000 employees. We had a total of 152 IT professionals across 22 industries who responded to this survey.
Great, thank you. And one more question. Normally, who is the owner of communication between teams and to the business? Is it the service desk? I'm going to answer that to say that it depends on how your major incident response team is constructed. It begins with the service desk. At some point, it gets handed over to a major incident response team, and they will delegate the communication. Generally speaking, communication to the business takes place from the major incident response team. It may go through the service desk, but the service desk may not be primarily responsible for that. Great. Thanks for these great questions. And I think we have to scoot now. Thank you so much, Vincent, and thanks to Everbridge for sponsoring this webinar. This has been our first webinar for 2017. It won't be our last. We'll have one every month, and we're coming up on February 21st will be the next one. This webcast is copyright 2017 by United Business Media, LLC. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by HCI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of HCI, thanks for your time, and have a fabulous day. Thanks again, Vincent, for talking with me this afternoon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Roy.